Hi there, welcome to this MCQ blast. This is for paper 1 and social influence. In terms of how it's going to work, there's going to be 15 different questions. I'm going to read through each question. I suggest you pause the video when I've finished reading through the question, give you time to think about the answer, keep your score as you go along. Okay, on to question 1. We've got which type of conformity is referenced here? Toby was unhappy that his friends were smoking, but decided to smoke too, as he didn't want to be the odd one out. Is that A, normative social influence, B, informational social influence, C, compliance, or D, identification? Pause the video. Now the correct answer there is C. So Toby's complying with his friends. And we know it's not one of the deeper types of conformity because with those we'd also see a change in his private behaviour. That's to say that he might later smoke when he's on his own. Just to note the difference here between types and explanations of conformity. Types being internalisation, identification, compliance, and explanations being normative social influence and informational social influence. A really common pitfall is getting these confused. So if you did pick A as the answer, just make sure you pay close attention to the wording of the question and how it relates to what's on the specification. Question 2. What is being described here when the answer in a task is obvious? A, an ambiguous task. B, an unambiguous task, C, ecological validity, or D, unanimity. So pause your video. The correct answer that we're looking for here is B, the unambiguous task. This question is relevant to conformity research, and like we said here, in particular the work of Asch. Prior to Asch's research, there was research done by a man called Sharif, and he demonstrated how conformity can occur in an ambiguous situation, which then led Asch on to question if people would still be likely to go along with the group even when they knew the group were wrong. That's to say it was unambiguous. And this is important because then it helps to see just how powerful normative social influence can be in explaining why it is that we conform. Question 3. In the task difficulty variation by Asch, how did he make the task more difficult? A, by decreasing the amount of confederates. B, by increasing the amount of confederates. C, by making the confederate give the correct answer throughout. D, by making the difference between the line lengths significantly smaller. So pause your video. Okay, so it's D. There are 3 variations of Asch's conformity research that you need to be aware of. Group size, which is explained there by A and B, so increasing and decreasing the amount of confederates. There's also unanimity, which is there as C, making the confederate give the correct answer throughout. With the task difficulty, in a way this relates to what we've just spoken about in question 2, as in making the task more difficult, it became much more of an ambiguous task. 4. Which of these terms is not relevant to Zimbardo's research? A, random allocation, B, volunteer sample, C, obedience, or D, ecological validity. So pause the video. The correct answer here is C, and lots of students get confused with Zimbardo, basically just because they don't pay attention to where he sits on the specification. Of course, Zimbardo is listed within the context of conformity to social roles and not obedience. So for A here, the participants were randomly allocated to the roles of prisoner or guard using the toss of a coin, and random allocation is a great way to reduce the effect of confounding variables when using independent measures design. So for B, we know they're a volunteer sample, they responded to an advert. Now for D, with ecological validity or mundane realism, students can get a little confused because they often assume that just because a piece of research is a laboratory experiment that it's automatically going to lack realism. But remember, Zimbardo went to great lengths to make his research as realistic as possible, even to the extent of having prisoners arrested at home. Question 5. Which 2 issues and debates are most relevant to Zimbardo's research? A, determinism, B, reductionism, C, ideographic, or D, beta bias. Pause the video. There's 2 answers here then. So we've got A that we're looking for and D. Students really like to use issues and debates in their evaluation. And at times, I think some students feel like they have to add in an issue and debate, so can often pick the wrong one. Now, there are a few issues and debates that are relevant to Zimbardo's research. We've picked out determinism and beta bias here. So for determinism, we could argue that the isolation of situational factors, such as the role assigned, allows us to infer that the situation determines behaviour. For beta bias, of course, there was a lack of females in the sample. Now, this might be problematic, as although the research tells us about how situational factors may explain how men conform to social roles, we could argue that it might not accurately be able to apply to females in the same way, because they may respond differently. Important thing just to highlight here, in respect to B, reductionism, do not overuse the term reductionism. In 2 years of examiners' reports, it's something that's getting flagged up. Students are incorrectly using the term reductionism. Okay, question 6. Which of these is not a situational factor affecting obedience? A, proximity, B, uniform, C, location, D, personality. So pause your video. The correct answer is D, because D, personality, is a dispositional factor that may affect obedience. So situational factors, think of them as processes that are external to the individual that could cause them to obey, such as A and B and C listed here, whereas dispositional factors are processes that are internal to the individual that may cause them to obey or indeed resist social influence. Question 7. Which of these statements about Milgram's variations is inaccurate? A, the percentage of participants administering the 450 shock was 20% when the experimenter wore regular clothes. B, the percentage of participants administering the 450 volt shock was 47.5 when the research was conducted in a rundown building. C, the percentage of participants administering the 450 volt shock was 70% when the teacher and learner were in the same room. Pause the video. Correct answer here is C. Now, you are required to know about Milgram's variations and the resulting effect that these variations had in respect to levels of obedience. And it's really important then, when reporting on these results, that you do it accurately. Now, the proximity variation, of course, resulted in an obedience rate that was actually lower than the original piece of research. Of course, it's probably more difficult to harm an individual when they're in the same room as you. Question 8. Which of these pieces of research can be used to illustrate the power of a uniform? Is it A, Mantell, B, Bickman, C, Blass and Smith, D, Hazen and Shaver? Pause the video. Correct answer we're looking for here is Bickman. So it was Bickman that conducted the field experiment in New York, where people were asked to place litter into a bin or money into a parking meter, and the person delivering the order would be wearing one of a number of uniforms ranging from milkman to security guard. Bickman found that orders were much more likely to be obeyed when given by the security guard, which supported, of course, what Milgram had demonstrated in the variation uniform conditioning for his research. A, referenced here, is a research by Mantell, where there was a Milgram variation in Germany that reported higher levels of obedience. C is Blass and Smith, and they illustrated that the perception of Milgram's research when they asked students. They basically said it was the experimenter that would be responsible, just demonstrating the power of legitimate authority and perhaps the agentic state there. D is a bit of a red herring, you probably spotted, because it's Hazen and Shaver. That was attachment research into the effects of early attachment on later adult relationships. Question 9. Which two of these best describes the authoritarian personality? A, the authoritarian personality develops as a result of harsh parenting. B, if you have an authoritarian personality, you will probably believe in fate. C, this type of personality has a strong sense of personal responsibility. D, having this personality makes them view others as scapegoats. So pause your video here. The correct answer here is A and D. B and C there, B refers to an individual having an external locus of control and C is an individual with an internal locus of control. The purpose of this question is basically just to illustrate that you don't just need to know about the research into the authoritarian personality, but also what it actually is. This is just because students often get bogged down in explanations about the F-scale questionnaire, and they aren't able to demonstrate knowledge of what the personality would actually look like. Question 10. In a conformity experiment, researchers measured the personality of participants and found the following results. Take a look at that results table there. So you've got two columns, you've got the number conforming and the number not conforming, and then the roles, you've got internal locus of control and external locus of control. And the question is, what percentage of individuals with an internal locus of control did not conform on the task? So pause your video. The correct answer is B. Now this is a bit of a sneaky research methods question, but let's not forget research methods can be anywhere. Now the answer is B, like we said, 80%, and we calculated this by dividing 20, which was the amount of internal locus of controls who did not conform, by 25, which was the total number of locus of controls, and then we multiplied this by 100. If you're asked to carry out calculations in the exam, be sure to always show you're working out. This is just because even if you get the final answer wrong, depending on how many marks the question is, you may be awarded 1 marks for your working out. Also, please don't forget in paper 1, 2 and 3, use a calculator. Question 11. Which two of these relate to the role of social support in resisting social influence? Having an ally can build confidence and allows individuals to be independent. B, having support from someone else means they can take the blame. C, having someone else supporting your points of view reduces the effect of normative social influence. D, it's just nice to have friends. Pause your video. Correct answers there that we're looking for is A and C. Now, within this area of the specification, which is resisting social influence, it's worth taking time to make sure you can accurately explain how things like having social support allow us to be able to resist the pressure to conform or obey, as well as being able to describe research that demonstrates the role of social support. Next question, 12. Devin is a passionate vegan and wanted her school to change their menu to a vegan menu. The school refused, so she suggested instead they should have a vegan option on the menu. How is Devin trying to get her point across? A, by demonstrating commitment. B, by demonstrating flexibility. C, by showing consistency. D, by going hungry. Okay, pause your video. The correct answer that we're looking for here is B. So Devin is being flexible because although she'd originally wanted the menu to be changed to a vegan menu, she later showed that she was able to compromise and just ask for a vegan option. You may have in your studies referenced the research of Nemeth to illustrate how a flexible minority is more likely to bring about the majority in accepting their ideas than an inflexible minority. Question 13. Which of these is not relevant to an evaluation of Moscovici's research into minority influence? A, biased sample, B, deception, C, mundane realism, or D, lack of control? Pause the video. The correct answer here is D. So Moscovici is a piece of research that you may have used to illustrate how a consistent minority can help change the views of a majority. Unlike other pieces of social influence research that you've come across, Moscovici actually used an all-female sample, hence why we've described it as biased there for the sample. Moscovici also deceived his participants and told them that they were taking part in a colour perception task. Now, deceptions like these are very commonplace in social influence research. It's because in deceiving participants, of course, they can ensure a lack of demand characteristics. It's the lack of control here, D, that isn't relevant to Moscovici's research, as he conducted his research in a very controlled laboratory experiment. Question 14. Which of these best describes the difference between flexibility and consistency? A, flexibility is likely to involve some compromise from the minority, whereas consistency is less likely to show compromise as the minority sticks to its guns. B, consistency is likely to involve some sort of personal sacrifice to illustrate the minority's point, whereas flexibility does not. So pause the video. The The correct answer here is A. One of the issues with B is it's actually describing commitment. So A just illustrates the fact that difference questions like these can be hard for students to answer. It's because what students often end up doing is just explaining what two concepts are without effectively addressing how they're different. So when approaching difference questions, it's really important to make sure that number one, you're very, very clear on what the difference is. And number two, also include a conjunction in your answer such as whereas, just to illustrate what that difference actually is. Question 15. A local council decides to fine households that do not use their recycling bins. Which social influence process is the council using to encourage social change? A. Conformity, B. Obedience, C. Majority influence, D. Minority influence. Pause the video. Correct answer there is B. Obedience. And this question relates to the last bullet point on the specification, which is the role of social influence processes in social change. And this can be a really tricky area for students as they're not really quite sure what this area is about. So think about it. Social change refers to the way in which a society develops over time in order to replace beliefs, attitudes and behaviour with new norms and expectations. And social influence processes can basically relate to any of the processes that you've covered within social influence, such as where we've done, or like we've done here with obedience. Okay, end of the quiz. I hope you scored highly. There is another social MCQ revision blast on here for you to have a go at. Anything you're struggling with in social, head over to tutor2u.net. There's loads and loads of study notes on there that could help you. And in addition, there's plenty of MCQ blasts on here for the other topics as well.